Thanks everybody for coming in and joining us for our presentation on what's next for HCI. Wait
Can
and
you hear me
see
all right,
if,
Kevin?
hey Dale, yeah, there you are.
I'm not sure what was going on there. Appreciate your patience, but back at it after a quick restart.
Excellent. Dale is,
I think we can go ahead and get started. Just a quick note for everybody. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to stop us. You can use the raise your hand feature. You can post something in the chat like a lot of you have already been doing so far, or you can come off mute and ask a question. Additionally, if you don't want to post them here, you're always welcome to reach out to your sales team here at Davenport Group with any follow-up questions you may have. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. Jump over. We'll have quick intros here. After that, we'll jump into the presentation. We'll be real quick. Promise it won't be death by PowerPoint. After that, we'll have a demo from Kevin, our our cloud architect, and then Eliza from In Good Taste will jump in and chat with us about the wine flights. For those of you who registered here within the last couple weeks, you have not had a chance to receive your wine yet. We're getting that out as quick as we can, so you will get that. But feel free to follow along, take some notes on those so that when you do receive it, you can use those then. So with that, I think we can go ahead and get started and jump in a little bit about Davenport Group. Again, my name is Dale Smith. I'm an account executive here at Davenport Group. I've been with Davenport Group, gosh, now about 10 years. I was at Dell prior to that for a little over 5. It's been interesting to see everything grow and change and evolve over the last 15 years. But today we want to talk about a little bit about Davenport Group. It's a comprehensive slide you can see here, but the point here is to show that Davenport Group has been very data center focused, a titanium partner with Dell, what used to be a Microsoft Gold partner, now CSP, principal partner with VMware, award-winning partnership for several years running now. We are focused, as you can see, through a various number of different technologies from hyperconverged all the way to AI and to endpoint. We've got an extensive group of engineers, something that I think sets Davenport Group a little bit apart from some of our counterparts in the industry is that the majority of our engineering resources were customers of ours. So folks that were IT professionals doing your job, sat in your seat, dealt with the day-to-day in the real world of IT. They're not folks that were taught how to deploy one product and they go and teach you how to run that one product. They are actual IT professionals. So I think that's something that's always been unique to us. And a little bit more about who we are and our capabilities there. And from there, we can kind of jump into a little bit more around some of the trends and current state we're seeing in the industry. So for everyone, I'm sure you're well aware of Dell selling off VMware to Broadcom. It's been pretty disruptive over the last, 1.5, 2 years. We've seen a lot of folks come and go in the hyperconverged space. We're seeing, those main players really dominate from Dell, Nutanix, Broadcom, and Microsoft, who's had a robust offering here that we're going to dive into a little bit more. They've just rebranded as Azure Local. This is what we're really seeing. We've seen a lot of our customers do this. I'm curious to know from you guys, those of you that were leveraging VMware prior to the transition to Broadcom, have any of you made the switch yet? Or at least thinking about the switch over to a different hypervisor or platform? You don't have to come off mute. You can post it in the chat as well. But I was just curious to know how many of those have either thought about it, making the change. It's something we see. It's the conversation we're having daily with all of our customers as well about, do I stay with VMware and kind of keep with the status quo? Do I start evaluating a new hypervisor? What does that learning curve look like? How can you help mitigate that curve? That's stuff that we've been talking to all of our customers about on a daily basis. So if you guys are out there thinking about it or frustrated with the current state of things, feel free to reach out. That's what we're doing every day and helping customers through. So I would encourage you after this, if there's questions, reach out to any of us here and we're happy to help. Some of the places we see this really being leveraged, and when I say this, I mean hyper-converged infrastructure. This is something that we started to see as folks were up for refresh. They may have had a SAN and some servers previously after they moved from physical to virtual platforms, but wanted to consolidate. We started to see them modernize their data center with hyper-converged infrastructure. Also saw that a lot with VDI, especially during the pandemic. There was a big scramble. How do we enable a remote workforce? How do we, help folks how do we be a little bit more agile and be able to scale should we need it? That's where we saw a lot of folks start to adopt hyper-converged infrastructure. I think now what we're starting to see is a little bit more in the edge with AI, machine learning, IoT. There's a lot more demand, on manufacturing floors. I've got manufacturing customers that are starting to see a real need for, a little bit more high-powered compute and resources at the edge. Alternatively, you may have folks with a lot of different locations that may have like a hub and spoke setup within their organization where they may have a big core data center, but then they've got a lot of remote offices and they need something that they can put at those remote offices. We see HCI being a perfect fit for that. But where I think we're going to start to see a lot more is kind of more towards this second half of the slide around hybrid cloud acceleration and cloud native adoption, where you start to see folks get a little bit more into how do we push pull workloads from on-prem to cloud, or how do we start enabling ourselves to be ready to build this stuff in the cloud. And so perfect timing, Kevin, you can go ahead. That's where Davenport Group has really started to evolve our capabilities. So like I said previously, we were a Microsoft Gold partner, so Microsoft Services isn't anything real new to us, but what we've started to evolve that capability around is cloud enablement. And so what you're starting to see is we've gone from a Gold partner to a CSP, so we've built out a portal for customers to self-serve licensing to help with enabling. Gone are the days where you'd send an email and ask for a quote, and then 5 days later you'd have a license key in your email. You can do that in real time through our portal and have access to those within minutes. And so that's what we're trying to help folks do, is empower them a little bit, give them a little bit more streamlined experience with Microsoft as they move more towards subscriptions, to give you the right licensing to help you optimize that licensing and know which licensing to even look at or how to be compliant. That seems to almost require a degree these days to do right. So that's where a lot of our capabilities are evolving, and now we're starting to dig more into the Azure piece. So yeah, Kevin just posted a question in the chat. Feel free to chime in there for those that are using 365 and have some type of presence in Azure. Unfortunately, some folks may not know they have a presence in Azure if there's some rogue IT out there, which we know it can be a challenge to get your arms around and get control back, right? For governance, for security. I know that's a big thing for us. We see that every day, folks talking about how do I enable single sign-on and federation and things like that, especially with cyber insurance policies now requiring those things. So we're here to help in any of those ways that you may have needs. So feel free to reach out as those things come up. Jump on over. So this is a little bit more on Azure Stack Local itself, what previously was called Azure Stack HCI. This is a little bit of the evolution from the Microsoft perspective. This all started 8 years ago with Storage Spaces Direct. We started seeing adoption of this for folks that wanted to start, some POCs, test it out, start learning more, get their hands on the keyboard around hyper-converged, start dipping their toes in. And we started seeing a lot more adoption right around the pandemic with HCI for VDI. Looks like we may have a question there. Kevin, did you have one? Or are you just raising your hand that you are using 365 or Azure?
You mean Katie, who has her hand raised?
Katie, sorry. All right, we'll continue.
Might have just put a hand raised to say that she was using it.
Yeah. Thanks for participating, Katie. I appreciate it. And so from there, we've really started to see Microsoft continue to develop their offering with Azure Stack for HCI, and the second version of that OS was launched 2022. or excuse me, February 2024. And then just recently, Microsoft announced kind of a rebranding of that as Azure Local at their recent Microsoft Ignite. And so really what they're trying to do is really shift their focus more to the latter half of this slide, more towards the cloud and an enablement for customers to get to the cloud. On the left side, you see, infrastructure modernization. That's where we started to see folks that were up for refresh on their, core infrastructure start to look at HCI. We started seeing adoption with VDI, and as folks started leveraging more and more around AI machine learning, they wanted to put more resources at the edge, and that's where we started to see this evolution. Now we're looking to really enable folks who are trying to modernize applications and get cloud ready, and then even start, building things from the cloud, from the onset of new projects. So that's really where Azure Local is headed, and that's why they've rebranded Azure HCI to Azure Local to start, enabling folks to get cloud ready and enable them to push and pull to and from on-prem resources and to the cloud.
And Dale, I'll just add to that. One of the couple of features that are coming for Azure Local are in preview, private preview right now, but two of them being right now Azure Stack HCI or Azure Local as a cluster has to check in with the Azure cloud every 30 days or deactivates itself. And they're going to be removing that requirement for certain use cases like government entities or organizations that need to have an air-gapped cluster that can't get outside. So that's one of the features that are coming under the Azure Local umbrella, as well as the ability to not even need Active Directory joined hosts in the cluster. You'll be able to use work groups with some combination of PKI certificates to allow for the trust that happens between your nodes. So that way you don't have to rely on an on-prem AD.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. So a lot of folks may say, okay, that's great. I'm interested, but how do I, implement this in my environment? That seems like a pretty big shift from, the infrastructure I have. Can I, is this going to be supported on what I have today? Or if I'm looking to refresh, what do I put it on? And that's where we've been leveraging Dell's integrated platforms, both what they term the AX node and an MC or multi-cloud node, to make this a simple and streamlined process. Really, the big difference between what might be an AX or an MC node is going to be that an AX is kind of a more customizable build it and designed with a little bit more offerings from different processors, drives, things of that nature to fit more of a customized approach. But they are all the components and those nodes themselves are all pre-validated and tested. So we're not having to search hardware compatibility lists. We're not having to dig through for the right firmware versions or patches. All that's taken care of and set from the factory at Dell to make that easy and streamlined so that you're focused more on deliverables for your organization rather than the minutia of making solutions work. Same for the second evolution of Microsoft and Dell's co-engineered platform being multi-cloud nodes. That came with the launch of the newer Dell x86 platform, 16th gen servers. And so what we're seeing there is just that farther reach into the Azure focused cloud-based approach. And so previously on AX nodes, you could do, Hyper-V or Azure OS. And what you're going to see going forward on multi-cloud nodes is an Azure local OS only to give you that full, end-to-end cloud capability. So that's really what we've been leveraging, what we've seen a lot of success with our customers with. Again, this kind of digs into why you would want to use one of those solutions, being that it's obviously pre-engineered from onset, so that from the factory you're getting a validated and tested solution. And from the factory, they're testing those before they go out, and they're shipping to you ready to go. Helps shorten that, order to implementation time and window so that you're quickly up and running. And it gives you that comprehensive management capability from the Azure Cloud Portal so that between Dell and Microsoft, you have that seamless approach. And this is where really the support piece really is the secret sauce, I think, to the whole thing. Um, Meaning that you've got that single support model. You're calling Dell when you're leveraging those platforms, and they're working directly with Microsoft on your behalf in order to support these systems. So when it comes time for, new OS upgrade from to 23H2 or to, Azure Local, and you want to make those shifts, you can leverage that support contract with Dell to do that. Um, Additionally, Davenport Group has managed services as well. We call DG Care. Should you choose to go down this road and you say, this is a big learning curve for me, I want extra coverage and capability, we offer those as well to help you shorten those learning curves and give you that extra from health checks to quarterly updates and patching and version upgrades. We can help you through that. Um, and it just helps provide customers that extra layer of support should they need it. Another big piece I wanted Kevin to kind of touch on here is part of the lifecycle management piece when it
Yep.
comes to Azure connectivity and the Dell platform. So Kevin, I want to kind of turn it over to you here so that you
Thanks,
can
Dale.
touch on that a bit.
Yep. Thanks, Dale. Again, my name is Kevin Morrison. I am one of the cloud architects here at Davenport Group, and I've been working here for just about 3 years now, but I've been working with Microsoft technologies for 2 decades. Um, One of the things that Dale mentioned, I just kind of wanted to reiterate or just give some examples on the ability for the Azure Local implementation packaged together with Dell's integrated solutions, whether that's AX nodes or MC nodes, which are considered the premier solution. You have this homogeneous system where Microsoft and Dell engineering are validating every update that comes down the line, firmware, hardware, any software updates, new builds or security updates that come down, cumulative updates from Microsoft are all going to be tested and working with your exact hardware. So because of that, you get this seamless, mostly seamless. I mean, we've all had some issues, but mostly seamless experience with being able to upgrade your environment. And kind of walking into this next slide, the capability that's built into this utilizes the Dell Open Manage software. Is anybody out there currently using Open Manage Enterprise to help them configure and maintain their fleet? Yeah, it's a very useful tool, and uh, the Azure Local Cluster has, with the Dell package solution, an Open Manage integrated plugin that works with Windows Admin Center. And it's probably one of the best things I've seen Dell come out with, especially when it comes to maintaining Microsoft products. When you go and deploy any of these clusters with Storage Spaces Direct or Azure Stack HCI, Azure Local, the Open Manage plugin, which you can kind of see here in a blurry screenshot. I don't have access to direct hardware, otherwise I'd show it to you. It does a fantastic job of having compliance policies for hardware and for software. It makes sure that on deployment and throughout the life cycle of your cluster, everything is held up to the best practices from Dell and Microsoft, whether that's security, uh, drivers and updates. There even one-click updates for your entire cluster. And for those of you who are using or familiar with Failover Cluster Manager and the roles and brokers that are capable or packaged in that, it's using the clusterware updating role. And Open Manage integrates with the CAU broker and does a fantastic job of seamlessly taking down each node in the cluster, draining it, putting it in pause mode, making sure it does all this to make sure the health of the cluster stays valid and operational. And we'll just do all the updates on a node, bring it back up, and then resume it, and then it moves on. And it does it dynamically without you having to do anything. You should probably be watching it, but you don't have to keep an eagle eye to make sure it's not failing, because it is thoroughly vetted by Dell and with Microsoft product teams. And it's just a fantastic tool. I love using it with any of these clusters I've deployed and for any ongoing management and maintenance. One of the things that we didn't quite that I wanted to talk about in the previous slide, but just kind of popped into my head was uh, because this is a Dell and Microsoft partnered product, Azure Local is you get a lot of support with Dell Pro support when you call in. Some other hypervisors out there, like or HCI with say Proxmox, um, they have enterprise support, but it's email only. With Dell, pick up the phone and you reach a person you can speak to immediately and get escalations getting you up to the tier 3 Azure Stack HCI principal engineers within Dell. I've worked with all those guys and they are fantastic at what they do. And if they ever have any issues where they can't figure it out, they have a direct back end line to the Microsoft product team. So they can get fixes directly from Microsoft should there be anything that they can't tackle themselves. So I highly, highly recommend if you're going to go with Azure Local, it's really beneficial to get the Dell version of the cluster because it's a validated product. Everything is put together well. And then you get that premium support. It is absolutely fantastic. I can't speak highly or I can't speak more highly of it. So this kind of takes us to what I would consider why everybody's here. We all want to see what Azure Local looks like, and so just as Dale mentioned earlier, this was renamed from Azure Stack HCI to Azure Local. So what we'll see is most of the branding has been changed to Azure Local. You may still see Azure Stack HCI somewhere in here. So I'm going to stop sharing here and getting us into the demo environment. This is a demo environment that has been deployed into the Azure cloud. So some features are not available that I would have loved to show you. But we will be looking at the vast majority of the features. There we go. All right, Dale, let me know when you can see the screen. Okay, great. Welcome to the Azure Cloud Portal. If you've never used it, this is what it looks like. Bunch of what Microsoft terms blades as they kind of panel across the web UI. But we have here, this is the Azure Local instance of this demo environment called HCI Box Cluster. If anybody out there wants to know how to deploy one of these, you can reach out to your AE and they can get a call together with me and I can walk you through how to get one of these set up if you want to incur the costs. It's not cheap, but it's a great way to, it's a pretty low cost barrier to at least testing out these features. And it's fully automated. It's as near to one-click deployment of a two-node Azure Stack or Azure Local cluster as you're going to get. It's called the Arc Jumpstart. It's provided by Microsoft. And again, if you're curious and you want to look into that, let your AE know, and then I can kind of either sit down with you or give you some more information. So this is the dashboard. This is the overview of your Azure Local cluster. And if you guys are not familiar with it, as I'm sure some of you aren't, right here at the top, it has this little section, what's called Essentials. And you've got your subscription name, because every Azure environment is hooked under a subscription with specific billing, and you have your actual unique subscription ID that is assigned to that subscription. Resource groups. If you're not familiar with Azure, every single resource that has been deployed to the Azure cloud has to be nestled or hosted in a logical container called the resource group. It's a great way to manage all your resources and to kind of co-locate them together, specifically because resource groups do get tagged to specific Azure regions. Like for this, we have this location here, East US. This cluster and its registration are all tagged to the East US data center region for Azure. You can see that our health status looks healthy, which is great. If we click on this, it's going to kind of take us over to something we'll come back to later, but this takes you to Insights, which is something phenomenal that I think Microsoft offers where it can take a look at any Arc machines that have been onboarded into the Azure Cloud Arc services and provide specific insights as to what recommendations it might make. You can see right here, it's talking about being able to enable REFS dedupe and compression to save space. And then, of course, event monitoring for the Dell Apex Cloud Platform, because it recognizes that these are an HCI cluster. All right, coming back to the overview. Again, kind of coming over here on the right side, we have the name of the instance of your Azure local cluster, how long it's been since it last connected. You can see this cluster last checked in with the Azure cloud 31 minutes ago. It has you get a custom location to ascribe all of your Azure local resources. So as Dale mentioned, one of the benefits of Azure Local is the quick deployment of Azure local clusters to any site. You, I'm going to pop over here to somewhere else here in a second. But the Dell has made it with Microsoft very easy to get a cluster stood up. You get however many nodes from one node all the way up to 16 nodes deployed on site to where you need it to go. You get them racked, stacked, minimally online with an IP address where they can register themselves with the Azure cloud. And then all you have to do is you will come into, well, Dell will probably help you with this as well, or I will be able to help you with this, or whoever on my team you want to help you with the deployment. You can create an Azure local instance. And all that looks like is this. You'll be able to choose your subscription, whatever resource group you want to put it in, and then give it a name. And here is where you'll see any Azure Stack nodes that may or may not be already registered to the resource group for onboarding into Azure Local. From here, this is a series of wizard pages that'll go through the configuration of your Azure Local deployment. And once you get through the validation and hit go, it is going to, using a runbook, automatically deploy the cluster, and everything is needed locally on the nodes, as well as to get it hooked into the Azure Cloud Services. And that it looks like this. It takes about 3 hours for this to do all of its work in the back end, but it checks on requirements, validates, and just runs through all of this stuff. Domain joining, certificate generation, updates as needed, security, cleaning up after itself. You'll see this started at 3:04 p.m. and everything basically ended at 5:36, just about 2.5 hours, depending on your hardware, how many nodes that will go up or down. But it makes it deployment very, very easy, or as streamlined as you can possibly make it, while having a lot of configuration control over your cluster. Does
And
anybody
Kevin,
have
real
any?
quick. Oh,
Yeah.
yep, you beat me to it.
Anybody have any questions right now with what I've been talking about so far? If you have a question, just feel free to raise your hand and then start typing, so we'll know you're wanting to ask a question. And if not, I will carry on. Okay, not seeing any raised hands so far, so I'm gonna keep moving on. We're back to the dashboard. There's a whole bunch to see. On the dashboard itself, you can see all the information. You've got, I just ended up here at the custom location. This is just, what type of resource it is, what your cloud ID is. Scrolling down under properties, here's a bunch of more information. Microsoft's done a good job, in my opinion, of co-locating a lot of information that you'd want to look at a glance for a cluster. You can see here that the identity provider is Active Directory, where AD joined. This is because coming with Azure Local, there will be the ability to have non-AD joined clusters. Billing status, right now that's just a free trial. You will be billed for Azure Local at, I think, $10 a month per core for each node in the cluster to be registered to have the subscription for Azure Local. Now, if you have, I believe, software assurance with your current licensing, you don't have to pay for it. It comes with your software assurance. Right now, we've only got 2 nodes in 2 machines in this cluster, and it gives a little hyperlink that if I click here, it's just going to take us right there. And we'll look at that here in a minute. You can see that because these are VMs inside of the Azure cloud, it's just Microsoft. When you go and deploy this, this will be show Dell as your manufacturer. You can see how many cores you have, what your workload looks like, how many virtual machines you're running, if you've got a Kubernetes cluster that's been deployed, check the if make sure that your nodes are up to date. This utilizes the Azure Update Manager to keep track of all your build revisions and make sure you're as up to date as possible. And that is not just for the hypervisor nodes with the Azure Local. It also will do that with all of the Azure Arc virtual machines that you deploy into the cluster. It can also track that using the Azure Arc agent that gets automatically installed on every one of these VMs. Over here, you can see on the right, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. With Azure Local, you get a standard basic Microsoft Defender subscription to make sure you get security alerts or recommendations for the hardware. And if we click on that, we'll see that this one, because I've only deployed it last week, it does have some recommendations for this cluster. So it's got that it thinks that they're not being checked for system updates. It needs to have a vulnerability assessment done, and exploit guard needs to be enabled. So it's doing its job to be able to identify any gaps in your security that would be some easy, quick wins to make sure that you're as secure as possible with your implementations. Just coming down the line, alerts. You can set up alerts for your cluster through the Azure cloud. If it notices any issues with any of the alerts you want to set up, I had created an alert. Oh, I created an alert rule earlier. Nope, I guess it's gone. Well, I had an alert set up. It seems to have disappeared on me, but you can create custom alerts based on any metric that it's tracking, and you can have it email a user, a distribution group, and you can have it trigger a bunch of runbooks and anything else that you might already have inside of your Azure cloud or set up for yourself. Finally, just last bit of the dashboard here, extensions. This is just all the different Azure extensions that have been deployed inside of the hosts or nodes in the cluster. So we have a bunch of telemetry, lifecycle management, Windows Admin Center, alerts, and everything else. This is the stuff that makes the integrations work, just keep working. There's a bunch of tabs here along the top as well. As I said, Microsoft has done a pretty good job of consolidating a bunch of this stuff together. So you can see here some of the features that they like touting for Azure Local are the ability to, as it says, deploy a Windows Server Azure Edition VM. And we're going to actually showcase that here in a little bit, along with Kubernetes clusters if you're doing any sort of containers within your environment and need that orchestration model with Kubernetes. And finally, Azure Virtual Desktop. If you guys are using VDI or using Azure Virtual Desktop right now, well, I guess that's a good question. Is anybody currently using Azure Virtual Desktop or any sort of VDI solution? Okay, that's fine. Nobody is either wants to talk about it, which is totally cool, or just does nobody's really running VDI. But VDI is virtual desktop infrastructure, right? So it allows you to deploy customized local machines that can be either split off so multiple users can log into the same machine and access the same applications with local data locality to anything else within the infrastructure. So you could have somebody from Singapore logging into your their own virtual desktop as if they're right there in your data center. So it affords that kind of capability. Azure Local fully supports having discrete GPUs in all of its nodes. So if you have any workloads that require intense graphics, maybe AI, large language models, any machine learning, or even just certain CAD programs or heavy graphics work, Azure Local can help you with that and also be able to deploy VDI or virtual desktops for those. One of the things there is Azure Local can have all of your session hosts, if you're familiar with it, basically all the virtual machines or the virtual machines hosting that where all the users are going to log into, they can be on-prem while your control plane for Azure Virtual Desktop is sitting in the Azure cloud. So you don't have to worry about if you've ever maintained a Windows RDS farm, the RDS gateway. You don't have to worry about RDS web or the licensing or the brokers. All of that's handled by Microsoft. Any questions around Azure Virtual Desktop? If anybody's interested in learning about AVD, you can reach out to your account executive. I can always have a chat with you, or somebody on my team can talk with you guys around what the capabilities are and how that might better meet your needs depending on what you want from it. Next, we've got, right again from the overview, a bunch of monitoring. Oh, did I have somebody have a question?
Uh, Chat doesn't seem to be working, at least for me.
Oh,
Maybe that's why you're not getting any responses.
does this chat work?
Likewise. Yeah,
Oh,
it says chat is only available during the meeting. Um,
weird.
what's weird is that I popped it over to the browser and it worked fine. And then when I
Huh.
popped it back to here, I can't. I was hoping it would reset it or something.
Yeah, I guess not. That's interesting. I I wouldn't be surprised if people are running different builds of Teams, because even myself, I've had issues with my Teams app lately where it just won't even let me change chats and I have to reload the entire app. So, huh. Well, if anybody is running AVD and wants to pipe up and just say hi or is had any questions, come off mute and chat. Say something.
We have a small AVD, set up here at Brunswick County here in North Carolina that we use.
How are you liking it?
I mean, it works. We had stood it up during the pandemic, and now it doesn't really get used. But I think it keeps like 3 VMs of our 20 powered up just in
Okay.
case. So,
Well, I mean that's a good thing to talk about. Is not that this is really what this webinar is about, but Azure Virtual Desktop has auto scaling plans, so we can dynamically bring up more session hosts or bring them down depending on the hours and the workload. So that way you don't have to constantly be paying for compute that's not being used. Thank you. Anybody else has any questions that want to come off mute and maybe just ask? Since I didn't realize chat wasn't working, thank you for letting me know. I will take silence as no questions, and I will keep moving. The monitoring solution here you can see gives you some basic metrics that you can look at: CPU, memory, network, disk IOPS, and throughput of the cluster. And it tracks it automatically from the last hour all the way up to the last 30 days is what's ingested automatically by Azure Local without you having to set anything up. Now, this was deployed last Friday, so we don't have data going back 30 days. And finally, Microsoft likes putting these little buttons here, or squares or rectangles that you can interact with to say, hey, do you want to install or set up this feature? Click here, and it will take you to being able to set up insights like we showed. I talked about Windows Admin Center, which is over here. This is a demo environment, so it's not working for this demo environment. I can show you, if we have time, what that looks like from inside the cluster. So if anybody's not familiar with Windows Admin Center, we can look over that. And if we don't have time, again, talk to your AE. I can sit down and show you what that looks like. Disaster recovery, if and Azure Site Recovery is a phenomenal technology that, if you're not aware of it, will replicate all your VM data block by block every 30 seconds or every 5 minutes from on-prem or really anywhere into an Azure Recovery Services vault. So that way, should you have an issue and you lose your either a specific VM or you lose your infrastructure on-prem, you can walk yourself through a relatively quick process and stand up your entire environment in the Azure cloud. You just need to make sure you have some networking details ironed out ahead of time. If anybody is curious and wants to learn more, again, talk to your AE. Be willing to sit down with you. Kind of getting away from the dashboard. This overview has a lot of information, and I want to talk about it in case anybody, for those who are not aware of what it looks like and what is available. Coming down here on
Somebody
the
had a
left.
question in chat
Oh,
around size limit.
size limit for disaster recovery, ASR.
Yep.
There is, it got recently expanded last year. I'd have to pull that data up, but I can find that for you. There is one, but it's very large. So I'll see if I can't pull that up here for you. Who was that asked? Was that okay. Could Dale, maybe you can take a note of that and I can get that back to him when we're done.
Yep, got it.
Yep, thank you. Any other questions before I move on down? If your chat's not working, come off mute. All right, I'll keep going. All right, so getting to the real meat of your day-to-day management of your cluster, you can see a lot from the overview, and you might just be perfectly happy with that because the whole point of your infrastructure is to just enable the business. It's not just to play around in it, right? You want it to make the business flow, and if there's nothing wrong with your cluster, you just want to get alerts as needed from your monitoring platform, which the Azure cloud can provide for you. Kind of moving down, just you have activity log, what things have happened on the cluster. You've got RBAC or access control. You can see who has what levels of access inside this resource. If you have any tags predefined in Azure, Azure Cloud Tags are basically a way to understand billing and know, okay, well, this resource was built for marketing, and now marketing's department is going to have to pay for the cost, the monthly consumption. Diagnose and solve problems. If you are actually having an issue with your Azure local deployment, you can either call Dell or you can try and use this. And sometimes you can actually it'll take you to a halfway decent knowledge base article. No guarantees, but sometimes I've found it actually useful. Windows Admin Center, as we said, if you're not familiar with it, if we have time, which I don't think we will, we can always chat offline about what that looks like. It's a very nice tool that Microsoft has released. It is free, and you can manage all of your servers. You can even put endpoints in there, along with any clusters, failover clusters, or SQL clusters, Hyper-V clusters, what have you. Azure Local as a cluster, you can monitor it all from there. Extensions, we talked about this. This is all the agent-based extensions that are installed on your nodes in Azure Local. And it's being a little slow, but it's going to pop in here. I'm just going to move on. Configuration. This is where you can see some of your billing. If you're using a Windows Server subscription that you want to put in here, you can actually pay for your Windows Server licensing through Azure Local as an add-on charge with your operating expenditure. And you can see service health, Azure Hybrid if you're using it with software assurance, as I mentioned before, so that you don't have to pay for Azure Local licensing, and then just some verification for your VMs. We looked at deployments. These are all the steps it started with when it created your cluster. The diagnostics and remote support is just if you need to collect logs. Not going to worry about going to logs here. Machines, this is the 2 nodes in the cluster, in our Azure Local cluster, and you can see a little information at a glance. Basically all that we already saw from the overview, but you can click on one of these. That's not where my middle click isn't working. You can, I won't even open a new tab. Anyway, you can click on this. It'll take you to the Azure Arc machine information in Azure. So you can see a whole bunch more information about the installed OS and what's going on inside of it from here. Okay, moving down the line. When you want to deploy a virtual machine, Azure Local, especially, well, really Azure Stack HCI Build 23H2 is a very cloud-forward cluster. And what do I mean by that? I mean that Microsoft, for now, until they relax their stance, wants you to deploy all your virtual machines from the cloud. They don't want you deploying it locally. You can use local templates. I'll show you what that looks like, but they do not want you deploying this from any of your existing RSAT tools. They want you to use the Azure cloud because they have automation runbooks. They automatically deploy the Azure Arc agent and all the extensions you need, and will effectively onboard it into this virtual machines section. You can see here, I've got 2 VMs, a Windows 2022 and a Windows 2025 VM. Right at a glance, you can see that I'm running the OS, what a resource group it is, a bunch of extraneous information. But you can click on each of these links, and this is going to take you to the Azure Arc machine and show you the information of that virtual machine that's running on-prem, but you can see and track a lot of it from within the Azure portal. So you can see here by networking, we can see CPU, memory. You can enable certain capabilities like we talked about before with Azure Local, insights, change tracking, logs, update management. You can use Azure Update Manager to maintain all the updates of your fleet or all of your servers and be able to manage it from the Azure cloud instead of having to use WSUS or Windows Server Update Services or SCCM if you're already using that. And I think most of us have probably heard that Microsoft is deprecating WSUS. If you haven't heard, sorry to break the news. Windows Server Update Services is going to officially go bye-bye. I don't remember the date, but it's coming. And I think that's a large part of push to get Microsoft clients using Azure Update Manager. And you can use that with any VM. You don't have to have Azure Local, but you have to have an Azure Arc agent installed. And that will allow you to you have to pay a fee, I think, per workload to register a virtual machine with the Azure Update Manager, but then you can manage your fleet and inventory from there for all your updates. Okay, now we've kind of gone through a lot already by just starting at the top, which is what I was mentioning earlier. They've consolidated a lot of it right at the beginning. I want to show you what the
we got about
process.
5 minutes. Just
Yeah.
heads up.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks. That's what I'm going to wrap up here with is I just want to show you what the process looks like of not all the way, but just touching lightly how to deploy a virtual machine. I think we all want to know. I mean, that's the bread and butter of having a virtual cluster, right? Virtual machine management. So with Azure Local, you start with logical networks. This is network ATC, and you create logical networks or what's called a network intent. And you can create a logical network and you get to choose the name. You assign it to a virtual switch that you have inside the cluster. And I will just put some dummy information in here. So we can just go here. You can choose whether you want IP addresses to be assigned from it, but you have to specify the pool of IPs that are going to be assigned to this logical network and VLAN. So this is for a good way to do your VLAN segmentation or your network isolation. You can also set your DNS. This is how any VM that gets deployed is going to be assigned to a logical network. And at that point, you can choose to either static or use DHCP assignment for the IP addresses, and it'll give it from this pool. So you start with your logical network. That's one step. What's one step? The next step is you need to have a VM image or template that you can deploy off of. Now you can have a VM image from the Azure Marketplace. That's this Windows Server 2025 is actually one that comes from the Azure Marketplace that I was able to push down into the cluster. It takes a little while, but once it's there, you've got a full image and all the embedded services as needed. And that is then selectable from when you're deploying a VM, but you can also do from a local share. So if you already have, which I'm sure most of you do, pre-configured template VMs or templates for your virtual machines, either in Hyper-V or something you want to customize, you can load it from a local share by just giving it the local share location to the file, the VHDX. And that takes it's a much quicker onboarding of that image this way. Storage paths. This is just all the different storage paths that are provided and available for your cluster. And then you've got your network interfaces. These are all the NICs that have been assigned to any of your VMs. And I'm just going to talk about this real quick, and we'll probably turn this back over to Dale. Deploying a virtual machine looks like this. You come in, you select your subscription, your resource group, you give it a name. Very similar to what probably a lot of folks are used to. Choose your security type, standard or trusted, and then you can have it automatically choose what storage path to put stuff in, or choose manually, and then you get to choose from your images. Select the Windows Server 2025. You get to choose your processor count, your memory, whether you want it static or dynamic. Guest management is always beneficial, gives you access to a lot of the governance that you want from being in an Azure Local cluster. Configure your administrator account, your local admin, and then the next step is going to be, let's see if I can't just do this. Let's see. See if that was enough. You can even have a domain join for you as well. You can add a data disk from here. You get to choose the name, the size, if you want it static or dynamic. If you're familiar with VMware, that's thin versus thick provisioning. And then you would choose what NIC or network intent or VLAN network you want to use. And again, you can have DHCP or statically assign your IP. From there, it's next, create, and then it starts creating your VM. And then that way you have all access to all the various bits and bobs of the Azure cloud with your on-prem virtual machines for your infrastructure. Any questions about any of that? Because I've gone over a lot. Feel free to come off mute and ask a question if chat's not working. Where is routing? So if you wanted to set up advanced routing, you would actually have to do that from inside the RSAT tools. Not everything is configurable from the cloud portal. So if you needed a more custom route table, you'd have to go and do it from the nodes. But one of those things that I think is very beneficial, Azure Local, like anything Windows, is fully adaptable, and it's just Windows Server Core that's been highly customized. PowerShell works. If you're used to using any sort of PowerShell scripting for automation, for maybe establishing route tables, bang out a script and apply it to all your nodes, and then you're good to go. Anybody have any other questions or something they want to see a little bit further? Okay, I'm gonna say it looks like we don't really have too many more questions. I'm gonna stop sharing here. If you do have questions after the fact, reach out to your account executive and they will get me involved and I can answer your questions for you.
Kevin, appreciate you running through that demo for us.
Yep, just pulling us back up here. Zoom. Okay. Now we just had questions. So if you have any more, pop in. Let us know if at some point, maybe towards the end or if you have a question, pop it in the chat. I'll answer in chat.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. For all of you that attended and registered, you'll be hearing from us over the next week or so. For those that take a meeting with us to follow up to continue this discussion, whether it be Azure Local or any other questions you may have or projects you may have coming up, you'll be entered to win the Solo Stove Bonfire Bundle, which is pretty sweet. Have one of those myself, love it. So be sure to be on the lookout for calls and emails from your team to take those follow-up meetings. With that, I think Eliza is on with us now, and we can jump into the fun part of the webinar, which is wine tasting.
Yes, thanks so much, Dale, and hi, everyone. My name's Eliza, and I'm going to be your virtual wine tasting host tonight or this afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. Now, we're going to do sort of an abbreviated wine tasting. We don't quite have enough time to try all 8 of your wines. I'm sure you could take that as a challenge, but I think wine is meant to be, sipped and savored. So what I'm going to do is walk you through sort of a fun device essentially that we use to really engage all of our senses when we do wine tasting at In Good Taste. And then we'll talk about a few of the wines specifically. What I would like to know is if there are any of the wines that you have in your pack that seem really exciting or ones that you'd really love to learn more about, because I could certainly pick wines for you, but that might mean that I'm going to explain ones that you have already heard of. So if there are ones in your 8 wine bottles that you're like, A Gewürztraminer. I've never heard about that. Go ahead and put that in the chat, just so I can know and use that. So there's lots of wild children in there, Corey. So if you can look at, it says wild child, and then under it, it'll say what it's your red, and Kevin's holding it up. If you can tell me, some of them say red wine, some of them say Mourvèdre. If you could just throw that in the chat, that would be awesome. I'm going to start us out. I'm going to choose our first one to start with just to get our palettes ready, but then I will take your suggestions as we go. So let me know what wild child you want to try. And then for now, while you're looking, red wine California, awesome. Thank you for clarifying, Corey. So let's use that. The red wine from California, the wild child red wine, that will be one that we try. And we're also going to try the La Pluma Alvarinho Vino Verde. So this is your white wine with this fun, sorry, with a blurred background, it's hard to show a bottle, but it's one of your white wines with the feather. It's going to say La Pluma in big letters, and then in small letters, it'll say Vino Verde, Alvarinho Vino Verde. So go ahead and open that one too. Open your red wine, and I'm throwing it in the, oh, that didn't come out very well, but that's what this one is called. So we're going to start with this one. If you have a glass or a mug or, a solo cup, any sort of vessel, I invite you to pour yourself a little bit of that first wine, that La Pluma Alvarinho. Pour yourself, I'd say, a hearty splash, maybe the top quarter of your bottle. This will give us enough to sip and try, but not have to chug when we move to our next one. And once you've poured, we're going to walk through our 5 S's of wine tasting. So I always like to say in our tastings, whether you are an expert or a novice, In Good Taste wine tastings are all about making wine fun and exciting and easy to explore. I think there's a tendency in the wine world to seem like there's a really high barrier to entry. Sometimes wine seems a little pretentious, a little hard to understand. There are confusing things about it. And so at In Good Taste, we're all about dispelling all of that. I was talking to someone who said, I only like Zinfandel. That means I'm not cultured. And I think that's silly. If you like any type of wine, you're a wine drinker. And even in this half an hour that we have together, I'm hopeful that I'll help you feel a little more confident in your taste and in what you know about wine. So what we're going to do first is engage all of our senses and really see how we can experience a wine, not just from our taste, but from the smell, from the sight. So if you have your Alvarinho poured, go ahead and hold your glass up. I can't see you, but I will believe that you are holding it up. And if you are somewhere where it's still light outside and you have a window by you, maybe hold your glass up to the window. If it's dark, like it is where I am, and you have a lamp close to you, hold your glass up to a lamp, any source of light, and take a second to look at that wine. Think about how you would describe it. The color, the texture, does it look thick or thin, translucent or opaque? The first S in our 5 S's of wine tasting is sight or see. So we're taking a chance to really check out that wine. And you might be sort of rolling your eyes to yourself or laughing and thinking like, what is there to see here? This is a really light-bodied wine. If I had a blurry background like Eliza and not a wine glass, this might pass as water. What is there? What am I going to say about this? And that's true. Alvarinho is a very light-bodied grape. It makes for a very light wine. And so there's not a lot of color, but even that lack of color can tell us a lot about what to expect on the palate, even before we take the first sip. So depth of color is really indicative of depth of flavor and body. The lighter the color, the lighter that sort of flavor and sensation will be. So as you sip your Alvarinho, you might notice that it might be a little punchy, a little acidic at the beginning, but that flavor dissipates pretty quickly. Now that will change once we move to, say, our red wine, our wild child red wine that we're going to try. But it would even change if we tried, say, our Chardonnay. That's a sort of fuller bodied, slightly darker wine. So once we've seen our wine, we get to do my favorite S, which is swirl. So take your wine for a ride, give it a spin. This is my favorite because it makes us look very professional. And who doesn't want to look like a professional wine taster? But it also serves a really important purpose. So if you think about it, your wine has essentially been asleep for most of its life. It's been trapped in a tank or a bottle or a barrel, and it has not received the invitation to come to the party, to wake up. And so when you're swirling, you're starting the oxygenation process. You're exposing more of the wine to oxygen. You're helping it to breathe. You're helping it to open. You're aerating it. And all of those things are going to help the wine sort of release the sort of cloud of alcohol that builds up during the fermentation process and bring out the more beautiful flavors and aromas that we love in a wine. So if you've ever opened a bottle of wine, particularly a red wine, and just poured yourself a glass, you might have been hit with like a cloud of alcohol, like might feel like rubbing alcohol or make your eyes water a little bit. That happens because the wine's been closed up. And so when we swirl, we give it a chance to open more. So once we've swirled, we can do our third S, which is smell or sniff. I invite you to stick your nose straight into your glass and take a big whiff. And when you do, I want you to search for aromas that feel familiar to you. Now, my joke is that often in wine professionals can get a little too poetic, a little too prescriptive with their descriptions, and it makes wine seem more complicated than it needs to be. So you might hear someone say, oh, this wine smells like a leather saddle being ridden through a glade of sweetgrass in the rain. And that's beautiful. And, what a lovely painting. What a nice image. But I'm not sure what that smells like. And so instead of sweetgrass and rain, I invite you to find those flavors that you might encounter in your everyday life. So maybe this smells like grapefruit. Maybe there's a little bit of like a floral note. Maybe it smells like the spray you use on your kitchen counter every night when you're cleaning up after dinner that has sort of that citrus note. Any of those could be right. When we describe a wine, we're just searching for things to connect to. Nothing is in wine other than grapes and yeast. All those flavor notes, those are just sort of the magic that happens. There's nothing added to it to get that flavor. The same goes for our fourth S, which is sip. So when you take that sip, oh, I love this. I love that we're already engaging in the chat. Lychee, Katie, you must be a wine expert because that's a top wine smell that we get there. That's advanced. When we strong fresh cut apples. I love that, Jackson. So we've smelled, now we're going to sip. When we take our first sip of wine, we really do want to coat our palates. And we can do that by taking a sip and swishing the wine back and forth in our mouth, or that feels a little weird. If you're like, my dentist wouldn't approve of this, you can take a sip and hold it in your mouth and then breathe in either through your nose or your mouth. That's going to give you a really strong flavor sensation. And once again, it's going to push away that alcohol, that burn that you might encounter, and bring out those more subtle flavors and smells. That's a technique that's often used when trying liquors or harder alcohols. So if you're trying maybe a scotch or a rum, something that has a much higher ABV content, doing that helps to take that burn away. But you can do it with wine too. And when you sip, I really want you to search for that familiar again. That said, if you're tasting and you're like, listen, all I taste is wine, all I smell are grapes, that's okay. Nothing's wrong with you. You might need to sip a little bit more. But really what I want you to focus on is if you like the wine or not. And everything else, that's the icing on the cake. That's for later. Your last S, and then we'll talk about this Alvarinho, is savor. And this really is your moment to think about why you like the wine. Do you like it because it's fresh and it's crisp, and maybe it's really cold outside where you live? And so this is like a nice reminder that summer exists and warmer climates or warmer weather might come eventually. Do you like it because it's easy to drink, or it goes with the goldfish crackers that you stole it from your child's lunchbox on the way to this tasting? Or maybe, it's the first white wine you've tried that's not super buttery and like that's refreshing and nice. Any of those could be reasons to really love a wine, and can also be things for you to store in your mental Rolodex for the next time that you ask for a recommendation from someone at a store or at a restaurant. Once again, you don't need fancy vocabulary or to be in the know to get a really great bottle of wine. So these are things to remember. The last thing I want to say about all of our wines before we dive in is that our wine is really made to be regionally and varietally accurate. And that's just sort of a formal way of saying we want these to be benchmark wines for you. Although we would love if you tried all this wine and were like, I'm only going to buy in good taste wine for the rest of my life. We know that that's probably not going to be the case. And so really what we prefer is that you just feel more confident buying wine in general. And so these wines are ones that you can think back to. So if you really love this Alvarinho, this is one where you can, if you are in a store and you see another Vinho Verde from Portugal made with Alvarinho grapes, you can think to this and be like, I really loved that one. And now I feel pretty good buying this one off the shelf because this one is supposed to reflect others that are made from grapes in the same region and in the same way. So something to keep in mind. One last housekeeping tip, and then we will actually talk about the wines. As I'm sure you've noticed, these wines are very well packaged. That plastic might have been a little annoying to take off, but the corks are bar standard. And so if you have wine left over in your bottle and you're not going to finish it, you can just throw it back in the refrigerator and it will maintain its flavor and freshness for 3 to 4 days. So if you want to try all 8 wines tonight, but not drink all the bottles, that's okay. You can still enjoy them throughout the weekend. Just put that cap back on, throw them in the fridge. All right, my friends. Oh, I love this. David saying, I can drink this after a hot summer day. Very refreshing. Yes, this is what we would call, now this is a very professional term, so get ready. We would call this a patio pounder or a porch pounder, in that you could just drink a full bottle, on a hot summer day. So I know it's not hot probably for most of you, depending on where you are, but we can think of the summer. So I love how we're describing this wine already. I'm seeing you note that this is a very crisp wine, that there's a little acid to it. We're getting sort of crisp, sort of sour green apples, a little bit of lychee. So there's some beautiful sort of juice to it. I'll tell you about this grape, the Alvarinho grape. This one in particular comes to us from Portugal, from the Vinho Verde region of Portugal. So if you've ever seen Vinho Verde, it's now becoming a pretty common Portuguese wine that we see, especially in places like Trader Joe's. I loved that comment about wine smelling like Trader Joe's. If you've seen Vinho Verde before, you've probably tried something like this. So Vinho Verde is a type of wine and it is a region. So this comes to us from the Vinho Verde region, and it is made with the Alvarinho grape. If you've ever had an Albarino with a B from Spain, you are trying a wine made with the same grape, just grown in a different country. So potentially something that you've tried before. This is one of the grape vines, the Alvarinho grapevines in Portugal, are some of the longest living grapevines in the world. Some have lived up to 300 years. So we're tasting an old grape, but one that tastes very youthful. So we've got a lot of beautiful sort of citrus flavors and aromas. You might get a little honeysuckle on the nose. Usually Alvarinho is a little less acidic than, say, a Sauvignon Blanc. So you might also get some subtle hits of like nectarine, like a juicy sort of stone fruit. In general, though, this is just a really great wine to open up your palate. If your mouth is watering, it's because it's acidic. It's that acid that's building up that saliva. And it would go beautifully with seafood, with tapas, like any type of kind of appetizer, anything that's not super rich, because this is still a pretty light-bodied wine. So seems like we at least had some people in the chat who enjoyed this one. I'm glad to hear. Now, I know I've had the request for the Wild Child Red. I'm wondering if there are any other wines that are catching people's eye, because the Wild Child Red wine is one of our fullest bodies wines. So I'd say we'll end with that. But if there is anything that you want to try before that, another red, another white, um, any thoughts in the chat? If not, the Pinot Noir. All right, let's do that. Corey likes the wild children, so we're gonna follow Corey's example or Corey's suggestion, and we're going to try the Pinot Noir. So these will probably be the last two wines we try, but we'll see. So we'll try the Pinot Noir. If you want to open that one up, go ahead. If you have not opened up the Wild Child red wine, it actually says red wine. I'm not just randomly describing it. If you haven't opened that one up, go ahead and open it up too, so it can get a little bit of time to breathe. So we're moving to our reds. If you have 2 glasses on hand, I would pour the Pinot Noir into a new glass. If you don't have 2 glasses, here's a little trick. If you want the purest taste of wine and you are trying wine after wine after wine, instead of rinsing your glass with water, you can rinse it with a little bit of the wine that you're about to drink. So we have our beautiful Pinot Noir. What you can do is pour maybe a thimbleful in your glass that you've had your white wine in, give it a swirl, knock it back like a shot, or pour it into your spittoon if you have it on hand, and then pour the amount of wine that you want to into the glass. We don't rinse with water because water has a really high mineral content, and that can impact the flavor of the wine more than using wine to rinse. And if you're like, it's a Thursday afternoon or evening, I can't even do that. That's okay. This is casual wine tasting. You can just pour yourself your Pinot Noir. Now, we were just in Portugal. We are moving to California to try this wine. So these grapes come to us from the central coast of California. This is a really large viticultural area, and it spans sort of Santa Barbara County in the south to the San Francisco Bay Area in the north. And that means that there's a lot of different weather patterns that impact these grapes. Now, Pinot Noir is a really interesting grape. It can be very hard to grow. Pinot Noir is known as the heartbreak grape because it has very thin skin and it gets sunburned very easily. And so that's hard. That's a nightmare for grape growers. And it also makes for sort of exciting wine tasting because we see Pinot Noir really change depending on the climate that it's grown in. So if you're someone who's used to Pinot Noir that maybe comes from warmer climate areas or sunnier climate areas, maybe a lot of California Pinots, you are probably used to a Pinot Noir that's really bright and jammy and very light. Pinot Noir is often called the gateway red. So it's because it's so light, because it's not very tannic, it doesn't dry your mouth out too much. It's pretty tolerable for white wine drinkers who want to get into red wine. But that's not always the case. Usually it's light if it's grown in a warm climate, but it isn't always. So if you get a Pinot Noir from, say, Washington or Oregon, the Willamette Valley, you'll see a Pinot Noir that's maybe a lot fuller bodied, maybe sort of smokier or earthier, and that can be surprising to people. So this Pinot Noir is sort of a meeting in the middle of the two extremes. Like I said, the Central Coast has a lot of weather, a lot of different climates. And so we are getting some of those cooler temperatures, less sun on those grapes, so they're able to ripen a little bit longer and get a little more concentrated in their flavor and in their sugar. So that makes for a Pinot Noir that's fuller bodied than we might be used to. Now, this Pinot Noir clocks in at 14.7% ABV, alcohol by volume. That's fairly high for a Pinot. Usually we see them around the 13.5%. area. So this is going to give us a lot of earthy notes on the nose. So you might pick up some like mushroom scents, maybe some soil. I often think it sort of smells like walking through maybe, I don't want to say a forest, that sounds too poetic, but walking outside in the rain or after it's rained, you know, that smell of sort of wet dirt or damp dirt, you might pick up that, maybe some moss. You might even get some like root vegetable smells, like a beet. So we get a little bit of soil there. And then on the palate, we're going to get more of that tried and true kind of warmer climate Pinot flavor. So you might get some tart cherry notes. You might get a little bit of minerality. I always joke that if you can't think about what minerality tastes like, think about being a child and licking a rock, or drinking out of the hose or drinking mineral water. It's sort of a slightly savory note that we'll get there. So a little bit of tart juiciness from those cherry flavors, a little bit of minerality, some earthiness. This is a wine that is not quite a steak wine yet, but it would go beautifully maybe with a tuna steak, maybe with a burger with caramelized onions. Goes really beautifully with Gruyere cheese. And then also, because of those sort of umami, earthy notes, it goes pretty well with any type of mushroom dish, anything maybe with Parmesan. Think that slightly savory, salty note, something really delicious. Sorry. I'll try to stay. I don't want to make anyone too hungry. But as you drink this, as you sip on it, you'll probably notice that your mouth is responding, your palate, ooh, that sounds delicious too, Katie. Your palate's responding in a slightly different way than it did for our Alvarinho. So Pinot Noir is not a very acidic wine. So you probably noticed that the flavor is lingering a little bit longer. You might feel a slight drying on your palate. When we try our red wines, we start to encounter tannins. Tannins are naturally occurring compounds that we find in all plants, but in wine, they often really show their colors in our red wines. And so if you're drinking a tannic wine, you won't taste the tannins so much as feel them. So you might feel your mouth drying out. You might feel a slight prickle along your jawline. If that still sounds unrelatable, think about if you've ever poured yourself a cup of black tea and let it steep for too long. If you've done that and taken a sip and had that really sort of bitter, astringent taste and sensation, those were tannins. You're experiencing tannins. Tea is tannic. So our Pinot Noir is not going to be very tannic, but you might pick up sort of small whispers of that. Now, I think we have time for one more wine, and this is here we go. Such a good question. So Jackson says, do tannins usually dull down as it airs out? So tannins, I will say this, red wine always benefits from having a chance to breathe. So letting it breathe, giving it some air, putting it through an aerator, that will help to make some of the flavors maybe a little more subtle, smooth things out. It will not necessarily reduce the tannins. Tannins really mellow out with age. So tannins help to preserve wine. So if you have a wine that's like super tannic, it's probably pretty young. And really the only way those like intense tannins will mellow to like a really noticeable way amount will be if the wine has been cellared for a while. But I think in general with reds, giving it some time to breathe, really helpful. The other thing that's helpful to make red wine maybe a little less intense is to chill it a little bit. I know that sounds weird, but all wine should be chilled at least a little. So with red wine, what you can do if it's been sitting at room temperature somewhere is put it in your refrigerator for about 20 minutes and then take it out. And that will be enough, not for it to be cold, but for a chemical reaction to happen so that it's not such like an intense burning alcohol kind of super full bodied in an unpleasant way experience. So giving it a little chill, I think can definitely help make it a little more subtle as well. Great questions. If any other questions come up, throw them in the chat. I'll try to answer them. Next, we'll move to our red wine. If you are ready, this will be how we wrap up the night, at least the wine tasting portion. So this is our Wild Child red wine. So we've got another one of these fun abstract labels. Sorry, my background makes it hard to show this. But it's another Wild Child. You'll notice that it's a beautiful dark red color, almost like a ruby red, if you will. Definitely a little dark, certainly darker than our white wines. We're really moving on a spectrum here. Now, if you ever see a bottle that says red wine or white wine, that's a really good indicator that it is a blend. So when we talk about blends, it means that there's at least more than one grape being used. And it means that at least 75% or that the majority percentage, this is always hard to explain. I'm not a math person, but that the wine or the grape that sort of has the largest percentage in the blend has less than 75% of the blend. So what we're trying is a blend of many grapes, but you could have something that is 26% Pinot Noir and 74% Sangiovese, and that would be considered a blend. If you had something that was 76% Sangiovese, so above that 75, then it would not be considered a blend. But to make things easier, this is a blend of quite a few grapes. We are trying grapes that come to us from all along the coast in California. So we have Barbera, Sangiovese, Tempranillo, and Mourvèdre. So all of those are really beautiful, full-bodied, medium to full-bodied grape varietals. Barbera and Tempranillo tend to have a really beautiful sort of black pepper, slightly smoky flavor to them. Sangiovese tends to be a little brighter and lighter, and Mourvèdre can give us some jammy notes. So in general, this is a really like full-bodied red blend. But the nice thing is that it should feel pretty smooth. I think in the US, we have this tendency, unfortunately, to sort of turn up our noses or look down our noses, I guess, at blends and think like, oh, that must just be the bottom of the barrel, or sort of things that are haphazardly thrown together, or, oh, blends are boring, or they're sweet. But actually, blends are really intentionally made. All of the percentages of grapes are very carefully put together so that they all complement each other. So a blend isn't a wine that has a lot of attitude. Sometimes in our single varietal wines, that grape wants to tell its story. It wants to be seen. So like our Pinot Noir, we knew that was Pinot Noir. But in a blend, all of the grapes are sort of like, they're not vying for the spotlight. They're coming together. They're making a smooth, easy drinking experience. So this one is 14.5% ABV, pretty nice middle of the road percentage for a red. This is going to give us a lot of beautiful sort of juicy and jammy flavors. When you hear wine described as jammy, that means that it is like a preserved fruit, like a blackberry jam. So we're going to get some blackberry, some cranberry, maybe even a little bit of cherry. You're also going to get some beautiful baking spices in here because of the oak that the wine is aged in. So cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, and then you might get a slight sort of smoke smell, maybe sort of like leather. I know I joked about it, but sometimes wine does actually smell like leather. But I promise no animals were harmed or involved in the making of this wine. So hopefully a really delicious blend, one that you could certainly pair with a steak or a rack of lamb or a grilled vegetable with a little char on it. But something to pair with, you want to pair this with something hearty. And I will end with that, my friends. Thank you so much for your excellent descriptions in the chat and your questions. Oh, such a good question. Do I have time, Kevin and Dale, for this last question? All right. Jackson is asking, is there a difference between wine that has a cork versus a screw top? No, it used to be that screw tops were like indicative of cheaper wines, but actually now we're seeing a lot of countries actually move to screw tops. Australia in particular only uses screw tops because it's much more environmentally sound. Cork trees are going extinct. Plastic corks are not a great substitution. So it mostly comes down to sort of winemaking culture, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And sometimes the screw top can actually preserve the wine even more. But yeah, doesn't have to do with quality anymore. Great question. All right. Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your wine.
Thank you, Eliza. Appreciate that. It was very insightful, very helpful with all the tasting notes and everything. And thank you to everyone else for joining. Appreciate it. Again, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. We're here to help you guys however we can.
Yep.
Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of the day.
Have a good one, guys. Everybody.